The phone call that changed everything lasted exactly 47 seconds. "We can't cover this," the hospital receptionist said, staring at her computer screen. "Your insurance shows you were removed from the policy 6 months ago." I was hemorrhaging, in a hospital bed, losing my first child, and my parents had quietly erased me from their lives without bothering to mention it. Not out of malice, they'd explain later, but out of convenience. I am married now. Someone else's problem to solve. My name is Sarah Chen. And this is the story of how I learned that some parents spend 18 years teaching their children to love them, and the rest of their lives teaching them to stop. When I was 7, I broke my arm falling off the monkey bars at school. The nurse called my mother, who sighed audibly through the phone. I could hear it even from across the room. "Can this wait until after my hair appointment?" she asked. "It's probably just a sprain." The nurse, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, looked at me with something I now recognize as pity. "I'm afraid it needs immediate attention," she said firmly. "The bone is clearly displaced." My mother arrived 40 minutes later, her hair perfectly styled, her annoyance palpable. She spent the entire drive to the hospital complaining about the inconvenience, about how expensive emergency room visits were, about how I should have been more careful. "Why can't you just be like other kids?" she asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Other kids don't break their arms at school." I stared out the window, cradling my swollen arm, trying to understand why I felt like I should apologize for being hurt. Even at 7, I sensed that something was wrong with this picture, that the adult was supposed to comfort the child, not the other way around. At the hospital, my mother charmed the doctors and nurses with her concern. "I'm just so worried about her," she said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "She's my precious baby. I don't know what I'd do if anything serious happened to her." She acted perfectly. Everyone said what a caring mother she was, how worried she seemed. They didn't hear what she said in the car. They didn't see how annoyed she looked when no one was watching. This is how my childhood always went. Cold at home, loving in public. My parents were great at looking like good parents when other people could see. When we were alone, I learned that my needs were problems, my feelings were too much, and I was something to deal with, not enjoy. I kept waiting for them to choose me, but they never did. When I was 12, I tried to tell my father about a teacher who made me uncomfortable. Mr. Peterson would find excuses to touch my shoulder, to stand too close, to keep me after class for conversations that felt wrong even though I couldn't articulate why. My father was reading his newspaper when I approached him, my heart pounding with the kind of anxiety that comes from knowing you're about to ask for help you might not receive. "Dad," I said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something." He didn't look up from the sports section. "What is it, Sarah? Make it quick." I tried to tell him about the uncomfortable feelings I had about Mr. Peterson, about how he stood too close and found reasons to touch my shoulder, about how scared I felt when I had to stay after class alone with him. My father got more and more impatient as I talked. "Sarah," he said, folding his newspaper with sharp, angry movements, "Mr. Peterson is a good teacher. He's been at that school for 15 years. If you're having problems with him, maybe you need to look at what you're doing wrong." The words hit me hard. "But Dad, I don't want to hear it," he said. "You're being dramatic. This is exactly what your mother and I mean when we say you're too sensitive. You need to get tougher." I stood there in our living room, 12 years old and needing protection, while my father told me that being scared was a bad thing about me, that my fear was a weakness, not a warning sign. I never brought up Mr. Peterson again. I learned to navigate his classroom alone, to avoid being the last student out the door, to make myself small and unremarkable. I learned that asking for help was more dangerous than facing the threat itself. Years later, Mr. Peterson was arrested for inappropriate conduct with a student. When the news broke, I waited for my father to remember our conversation, to apologize, to acknowledge that he'd failed to protect me when I'd asked for help. He never mentioned it. By the time I was 16, I had learned to take care of myself. I figured out how to wash my own clothes when my mother decided I was old enough. I learned to cook simple meals when my parents started working late and leaving me alone. I learned to save the allowance money they sometimes gave me, to plan ahead for school things they might forget to buy. I became the kid who never asked for anything. Asking felt dangerous, like I might lose even the little bit of care I got. I got really good at being easy, at guessing what people needed before they got upset, at keeping everyone happy. "You're so grown up," my mother would say. "So mature. For your age." What she really meant was, "You're so easy to ignore." I learned to take care of myself because the people who were supposed to take care of me were too busy taking care of themselves. They never learned to put someone else's needs before their own comfort. They never learned to love someone more than they loved being comfortable. When I graduated high school as the top student, my parents came to the ceremony. They took photos and posted them online, writing about how proud they were. But they forgot to sign up for the dinner afterward, so there wasn't a seat for me at their table. I spent dinner sitting with my friend's family, watching my parents talk and laugh with other adults like they hadn't just left me out of my own celebration. "Don't be so sensitive," my mother said when I tried to talk to her about it later. "We were proud of you. We were there, weren't we?" Being there was not the same as caring about me. Taking photos was not the same as seeing me. But I was 18 and about to leave for college, and I'd already learned that pointing out what my parents did wrong only made them tell me I was the problem for needing too much, for feeling too much, for being too much. College opened my eyes. I met friends whose parents called them regularly, not to check up on them, but because they wanted to hear about their lives. I met people whose families sent care packages and remembered birthdays and came to visit because they actually wanted to spend time together. I met David during my 3rd year, and when I brought him home for the first time, I watched my parents put on their charm show with the same skill they'd used on my teachers and doctors and neighbors for years. They were funny and warm and interesting, asking him smart questions about his studies and his family and his plans. "Your parents are amazing," David said afterward. "They're so interested in everything, so caring." I smiled and agreed because I didn't know how to explain that what he'd seen was an act, not real love. That my parents could be great dinner guests for a few hours but had never shown that kind of interest in my real life, my real thoughts, my real dreams. When David and I got engaged, my parents threw us a nice engagement party. They invited all their friends, hired someone to do the food, and gave a speech about how happy they were to have David join the family. Everyone said what generous hosts they were, what loving parents. But when it came time to plan the wedding, they handed me a check and said, "This is what we can give you. Do whatever you want with it." They didn't ask about what I wanted for my wedding day, didn't offer to help with planning, didn't seem to care much about being part of it beyond paying their share. I planned my wedding like I'd planned everything else in my life alone, knowing that I had to manage everyone else's feelings along with my own. The morning I started bleeding, 3 months into my first pregnancy, I called my mother first. Not because I expected comfort, but because 33 years of training had taught me that family was supposed to be the first call, even when family had never been there when I needed them. "I'm scared," I told her. "I think something might be wrong with the baby." "Well, these things happen," she said, using the same casual tone she might use to talk about bad weather. "At least you know you can get pregnant. That's something. At least you know you can get pregnant." Like my terror about losing my first child was silly. Like the only thing that mattered was knowing my body worked. "Mom, I need to go to the hospital," I said. "I'm bleeding." "You should call David," she said. "He's your husband now. This is his job now. His job now." Not our shared worry about our daughter and grandchild, not our family's crisis, but David's job. I'd been passed from one man to another like property, and my emergency was no longer their problem. When I found out at the hospital that they'd removed me from their insurance, not forgotten, removed, I finally understood what my mother had been telling me my whole life. I was David's job now. I was someone else's burden. The insurance wasn't a mistake. It was a message. You're no longer our child to worry about. We did our legal duty. Whether you live or die is now someone else's job. I lost my daughter that day, but I'd lost my parents years before. I just hadn't been ready to see it. The funeral was where I finally found my voice. Listening to my mother act out grief she'd never felt in private Watching her claim to be a loving grandmother for a child she'd never cared about, seeing her accept sympathy for a loss she'd treated as no big deal, something broke inside me. For 33 years, I'd protected my parents from the results of their choices. I'd made excuses for them being absent, made their cruelty sound less bad, kept their reputation safe while ignoring my own needs, but grief burns through being polite. Loss shows you what really matters. Standing in that room, watching my mother act sad for an audience while I sat in the front row dying inside, I finally understood that I didn't owe them anything. When I stood up to speak, I wasn't planning to expose them. I was planning to thank the people who'd really shown up, who'd really cared, who'd treated my loss as important. But as I spoke, I realized that honoring real love meant calling out fake love. That celebrating the people who'd chosen to be family meant pointing out the people who'd chosen to be strangers. I've learned lately that grief shows you who people really are, I said, looking right at my parents. Some people love you loudly when others are watching and quietly when they're not. Some people call you family right up until you actually need them to act like family. My mother's face went stone still. My father stared at his hands. The room was quiet except for the sound of truth settling into silence. After the service, they came up to me with apologies that felt more like damage control than real sorry. My mother reached for my hand with the same fake softness she'd used when I was 7 and had embarrassed her in public, a show designed to fix her image, not our relationship. "We're still your parents," my father said, like the title meant something separate from the actions that should go with it. "No," I said quietly. "You're the people who gave birth to me. Real parents protect their children. You were the danger I could never see coming." I pulled my hand away from my mother's grip and walked away from them for the last time. Cutting off contact with my parents felt like doing surgery on myself without pain medicine. Even when a relationship is toxic, even when it's hurting more than helping, cutting it away leaves a wound that takes time to heal. I grieved the parents I'd never had more than the parents I'd lost. I mourned the childhood I'd never lived, the protection I'd never gotten, the unconditional love I'd never known. I grieved the grandparents my future children would never have, the family traditions that would die with me, the belonging I'd spent my whole life looking for in people who couldn't give it. But I also felt something I'd never felt before: peace. The exhausting work of managing my parents' feelings, of protecting their image, of making excuses for their failures, all of it was finally over. I could stop playing the part of the grateful daughter and start being the real person I'd never been allowed to be. Therapy helped me understand that my parents' inability to love me right wasn't about my worth, that their emotional distance was a wound they'd gotten from their own childhoods, a family pattern of neglect and abandonment that they'd never learned to break. Understanding didn't mean forgiving. It meant accepting. It meant seeing that they'd given me everything they could give, and that it wasn't enough. It meant knowing that they'd failed me not because they were evil, but because they had limits they'd never tried to fix. Most importantly, it meant promising to break the cycle. When David and I adopted Emma, I made a promise to myself and to her. She would never have to earn my love. She would never have to act perfect to get care. She would never have to choose between her needs and my comfort, because I would always choose her. I learned to be the parent I'd never had. When Emma had nightmares, I sat with her until she felt safe. When she had trouble in school, I stood up for her without making her feel like a burden. When she made mistakes, I helped her learn without making her feel ashamed for being human. I learned to say sorry when I got things wrong, to admit when I was struggling, to show the kind of emotional honesty I'd never gotten. I learned that good parenting wasn't about being perfect, it was about being there, being responsible, being committed to your child's well-being more than your own comfort. Emma is 15 now, and when she tells me about problems at school or fights with friends or fears about her future, I listen without trying to fix everything or make it smaller or brush it off. I validate her feelings without making them about me. I offer support without keeping score. She has never had to wonder if she matters to me. She has never had to compete with my other priorities for my attention. She has never had to earn the love that should be hers just for existing. This is how generational trauma dies. One parent at a time, one child at a time, one deliberate choice at a time to love better than we were loved. Last year, I received word that my mother had died. Heart attack, sudden, no suffering. My father had called David to let me know, as if even in death, he couldn't bring himself to speak to me directly. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, no closure. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the woman who gave birth to me was gone, and that she'd been gone from my life for so long that her physical death was merely a formality. I didn't attend the funeral. I didn't send flowers. I didn't reach out to my father to offer condolences or shared grief. Their rejection of me had been complete and final. And my response was the same. But I did something else. I took Emma to lunch that day and told her about her grandmother she never met. Not the sanitized version I might have shared to protect her, but the truth that some adults never learn to love properly, that some parents are too wounded to provide the care their children need, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who can't love you back. I'm sorry you didn't have good parents, Emma said simply, but I'm glad it made you a better mom to me. This, I realized, was the gift in the wound, the silver lining in the trauma, the meaning I'd managed to extract from meaninglessness. My parents failed me completely, but their failure taught me how to succeed. Their absence showed me how to be present. Their conditional love taught me how to love unconditionally. I couldn't save my first daughter. I couldn't heal my relationship with my parents. I couldn't undo the harm they'd caused or the years I'd lost waiting for them to choose me. But I could choose differently. I could break the cycle. I could become the parent I'd needed and never had. And in the end, that had to be enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.